Welcome to Married to His Will. I'm Suzette Williams, your host, a licensed professional counselor in Georgia and nationally certified. Whether this is your first time or you've been with me for a while, I'm truly grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for inspiration, healing, and truth, where faith meets real life. I love weaving in clinical insights along with personal stories to encourage and uplift you on your journey with God. If you're new, be sure to check out Season 1, Episode 1, where I share my testimony. It's a powerful reminder that God doesn't just want to save you from hell, He wants to see you thrive in Him. Since walking through my divorce, I've discovered a deeper understanding of who I am and who I'm becoming in Christ. And yes, to my future husband, if you're listening, may you find me right where God has positioned me, in His presence. I'm so excited for what's ahead, and I'm thankful for every listener who's joined me on this journey, and for those who are just getting started. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share if this blesses you, and check out the description for updates or extra info. Let's dive into today's episode. I pray it blesses you. Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to my podcast, Married to His Will. I'm your host, Suzette Williams, and I'm so excited to dive into today's segment. And we're diving into the concept encapsulating by the Proverbs 13, verse 12, that says, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life." Hope deferred makes the heart sick. This phrase, rooted in the Bible, resonates with many. So, who have experienced the pain of unfulfilled expectations? I know I have. And so, let's unpack what this means, how it affects us, and what we can do to cope with and just overcome this emotional challenge. I know for me, I've been having my own challenge, walking through the journey of waiting for the promise that the Lord has given me. I'm in the waiting. You see, if you have never checked out my story through this podcast, I've been doing this podcast for over 2 years, and it's been a journey of healing for me. I've still been in the journey, and I would have loved to go through the whole story again with you and do a whole recap with you, but just watch the podcast or listen to it. You can start from the beginning if you'd like. But the reason I coined this or called this podcast Married to His Will was because after my divorce, I realized it was up to me, right? It was up to me to do the will of God. And what happened to the rest of my life, I wanted it to be in God's hands, right? I don't want to make decisions on my own. So it's not my job to control the outcome. I just know that I had this plan to be married to His will for the rest of my life. Everybody plans that when they get married, to be married for life, right? To be married for a lifetime. That was my idea of marriage. It felt like a lifetime, and I couldn't continue the rest of my life in misery, in toxicity, in abuse, in a place that was doing me harm. And so while I left the marriage with a promise, it's been about 3 years and a half, maybe 3.5 years. And I've been in the process, and God continues to show me who I am, and He's causing me to become who I need to be. Like He told me He wanted me to be. He wants me to be someone who He's chosen for me to be. And so let's look at what the proverb means. What's hope deferred? It refers to the postponement or delay of our deepest desires and aspirations. When something we long for seems perpetually out of reach, it can lead to emotional distress. And this is often described as a kind of heart sickness. It reminds me of what I talked about today in our church. We had a panel discussion at Deeper Church, and we talked about trauma. And I define trauma. Trauma, we know, is a word that's kind of thrown around often, and we use it sometimes frivolously at times. However, it's more than just a difficulty, right? And so I'm going to read the definition of trauma to you. what is trauma? Well, trauma is an emotional response to a distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. And there are many types of trauma. So there's acute trauma, like a one time event, such as an accident or an assault. Then there's chronic trauma. This has to do with repeated events, such as ongoing abuse, domestic violence, things like that. Then there's complex trauma, multiple layered traumas, right? And then developmental trauma during critical stages of childhood. This is occurring while in those stages of development. So that's why we call it, or those critical stages of development. That's why we call it developmental trauma. So there's a biblical understanding of trauma, and we can read that in Psalms 34, verse 18. It said, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." Isaiah 61, verse 1 says, "The Messiah came to bind up the brokenhearted." We know about David, who went through grief. He went through betrayal. From the Psalms, we see a lot of grieving Psalms, right? And those that has filled with praise as well and adoration. And then you have Joseph. I dove into the story of Joseph today as I thought about how much trauma he must have endured. And I would say he had developmental and complex trauma, just when you think of the multiple events that he experienced that were disturbing. I mean, he experienced rejection through his family, sold into slavery and being imprisoned, just experiencing some unjust things. And he probably felt forgotten and neglected, all of that. Joseph experienced family trauma and imprisonment. And you can find that in Genesis 37 to 50. We can think of other people in the Bible like Tamar, who experienced sexual trauma. Job, he experienced grief and suffering like nobody I know. Jesus dealt with rejection and suffering himself. And so the effects of trauma include emotional issues such as fear, anger, depression, shame. And then there's physical trauma. You have headaches, insomnia, fatigue. These are just symptoms of trauma. And there are behavioral effects as well of trauma, such as isolation, addictions, control issues. And so, how do we recognize trauma in others? We watch for sudden behavioral changes, right? Emotional withdrawal, overreaction to stress, and difficulty trusting others. So, when you see someone who may be experiencing a trauma, you may ask gently, "Have you experienced anything painful that might be affecting you today?" You can ask them a question, you can start the conversation. We want to use trauma informed language. You can't just say, "Just get over it." We want to avoid saying things like that or saying, "You must not have enough faith." That's just not wise. Instead, you want to say things like, "God sees your faith and is patient with your process. Healing takes time and you're not alone." And there are different pathways to healing. You can see a Christian counselor, maybe for trauma therapy or trauma informed therapist, okay? For inner healing and deliverance prayer. You can seek for that. We talk about that today in our panel at church. We talked about inner healing and deliverance as well as trauma. And we can use scripture, meditation, even medication. Sometimes that can be used. The Lord can use whatever He chooses to heal us. And so meditation and forgiveness can work. I actually take my clients through a method called forgiveness therapy, and it is a process. It's not a one time thing. And so you also want to consider support groups or pastoral care. Romans 12 tells us, in Romans 12, verse 2, it says, "We are transformed by the renewing of our mind." And so we need help sometimes to deal with our cognitive distortions and beliefs that are corrupt. We have belief systems at times that are just not the way God sees it. And so we may need some help to undo some of that. And so that's my personal story. I've come through a long marriage that was full of chaos and toxicity. And so some of what I God has to undo from my experience, I may not even recognize until I kind of walk through it. And I have to say, I went through other things in my life, not just my marriage, but other things in my life that I hadn't thought about until I was older, like the impact of my mom having to come to this country before we came. So we had 7 years that we were separated. And so that affected me in my development. I was young, coming to this country was a big transition. And me not having my mom for those 7 years impacted the way I am as a mom. And so there are times I have to work hard to keep that connection with my children and feel like I'm doing a good job as a mom. We don't really blame our parents. I don't want to blame parents or anything. That's not what this is about. But we acknowledge the impact of their parenting. And none of us are perfect as parents. It's important to acknowledge the impact of issues, things that you've experienced, and just build that awareness of how you are affected. And so for me, I've been affected when it comes to even my own decision making, how I see myself, all of that. I feel like for the majority of my life, until my decision to divorce, I kind of was walking in some form of subconsciousness, right? Pastor Alex talked about the subconsciousness that happens with children from the ages birth to like 8 years old. We don't remember a lot of what happens during those times of our life. We're just behaving based on what we're taught. And so I feel like a majority of my life, I was just behaving based on what I saw and thought. So sometimes things we're doing until that age, 7 or 8, we're doing subconsciously. That's why we find that we don't remember a lot of things from when we were very, very small. But when I think about my own life, I sometimes forget certain details, or, well, now I can probably remember more details of my life. I think for a lot of time, I was just going by what people told me, even how they told me how to interpret the Bible, until I decided for myself that I wanted to get to know His Word, get acquainted with His Word in a deeper way where I was receiving revelation for myself. So I felt closer to God even as a teen. I was very close. I was studying the Word, but there's nothing like growing in maturity and starting to hear God for yourself. This is what happened during the course of my marriage. I began to learn more about who I was and what God wanted for my life. I became awakened to what was not good for me. For I was experiencing a chaotic situation that God did not design for me. While the Lord has released me from that place, I've had to go through a journey of healing. And this podcast has been a space for me to express those testimonies and to share some of what I've been through. And along the way, forgiveness has happened. I've been able to forgive my ex husband. We've had moments where we've talked, and even in the most recent months, he and I talked about the fact that he didn't like me starting this podcast. He didn't like what he had to hear. He was honest about that. And of course, I knew that wouldn't be favorable to him. And we were able to have a conversation about it. And I even said to him, listen, you can always come on my podcast and we could talk about where we are today. And I'm grateful that we can be at a place where we can have a conversation without it blowing up. There are certain topics I would never talk to him about because it's as if we could never get to an amicable place about those things, such as his view on the children, and finances, and things like that. That was very challenging. And there was that lack of awareness or cognitive understanding, I think, that was hindered by trauma. And it created chaos in the relationship for everyone, the family. And so at the end of our relationship, I feel he still wasn't able to see clearly his role and his part in taking responsibility for where we were. But we've come a very long way. And today I can say things are so much better. He's more consistent with his financial responsibility. And though sometimes I feel like it's not what I want in terms of what I'm satisfied with, I'm just being grateful. And I don't complain anymore. It's between him and God, and I'm thankful that the Lord has brought us to this point where forgiveness is evident and healing is evident, and we can communicate well. I don't need to bring up anything. He's finally acknowledging the ways he behaved that were not good. I'm grateful for growth. There's so much I can be thankful for right now. The fact that there's more involvement coming from him towards the children, I'm very grateful for the process. And I'm glad we're in this space that was important to me so that I can move forward. And when we talk about a blended family, that wouldn't only include the person I choose to be with, but also who he chooses to be with. That would affect our children. And we have six children together. And they're wonderful people. These three boys are almost adults. We have two adults. One is 21, one is 18, and then there's my 17-year-old Noah. And then I have the girls who are in their puberty stage, they're well in their teens. The 15-year-old, she's so helpful. There's Grace, who's almost 14, and then Lillian, who's almost 7. I mean, it's amazing to see their growth and what God is doing in their lives outside of the challenges of this divorce. I am so glad for where we are, even with how Noah had to experience issues with his mental health. Even that's getting better. And so I see the healing, I see the restoration, and the process is still unfolding. So when something we long for seems perpetually out of reach, it can lead to emotional distress and often described as a heart sickness, a kind of heart sickness. This heartache isn't just metaphorical, it can manifest in feelings of sadness, frustration, and even depression. The proverb itself originates from the book of Proverbs in the Bible. We said Proverbs 13, verse 12, which states, "Hope deferred makes the heart sick, but a longing fulfilled is a tree of life." This suggests that while delayed hopes can cause pain, their fulfillment brings vitality and joy. So the longer you have to wait for something, when that things come to pass, my God, the joy that emanates from that. So that tree of life, maybe this desire that I have to be married again, maybe the process is so that it becomes a tree of life, right? It's I think it's more mature when it becomes a tree of life. Wow. And I hadn't even seen that before. A tree is, I mean, it takes time to become a tree, right? It goes from a seed. And so God gave me a promise, this seed. It came in seed form, this word that I had, or this hope after my marriage ended. And I'm here like, Lord, when is it going to happen? How long is the process? But I'm thinking about this verse more in detail, and I'm thinking about the fact that I've been desiring it for a while. And it feels so frustrating at times. However, I wonder what stage it's in, right? I wouldn't want to have a premature tree, like a flower or a seed that's not yet a tree when the time comes for this new person. So instead of me focusing on the end result, I need to focus on what this journey is doing. There are beautiful moments along the way. I have been more focused on my own self care. I've been in therapy, and that's been beautiful. I've been in therapy for with a mature, seasoned person, and I've never seen a male therapist before, and he's an older man. Could be my dad, but he's a white male. Yet I trust this therapist. We've developed great rapport, and I've learned so much from him already. And we're about to go into the next phase of therapy, and where I feel like we're diving into the trauma. And so we're going to be going into some psychodrama, and I'm excited to experience it. So the things that have occurred that I really haven't really considered, we're going to dive into those things and how it's impacted me, and maybe in a subtle way. And I can, and I want to see it. I want to know what those things may be. So like when I'm alone at night and I want to just watch TV and kind of block out the noise or not spend enough time with the kids, things like that, or behaviors I probably need to dive into. Our behaviors are telling at times, and sometimes it's subtle that something is affecting us. And so I'm happy that even as a therapist, I can recognize my need for a therapist. I have a need for constant or consistent healing. I have a need for wholeness. And so until it gets where it needs to be, I'm going to seek help. Until it becomes a mature tree, I still have to walk through the process. How do we cope with deferred hope? Hope is an essential part of the human experience. It drives us forward, providing motivation and comfort even in challenging times. However, when hope is deferred or delayed, it can lead to feelings of disappointment. It can lead to feelings of frustrations, like I've experienced. And learning to cope with deferred hope is crucial for maintaining emotional well being. So, I talked about trauma earlier. We could put this together. Where is our heart being sick? Where is it becoming sick? Is some sort of trauma going on? Did something happen? Are things going on in your heart? So, understanding deferred hope occurs when our expectations or desires are postponed or unmet. This can happen in various aspects of life, such as career goals, personal relationships, or personal achievements. So, understanding that hope can be deferred rather than lost is the first step to coping with it. So, we don't have to lose hope, but it's just deferred, it's just delayed for a bit. So, what is the emotional impact of deferred hope? The emotional impact of deferred hope can include disappointment, like I mentioned. When our hopes are delayed, it is natural to feel let down, frustrated. Continual delays can lead to anger and irritation. So then there's sadness. The absence of expected outcomes can cause feelings of grief or sadness. There's also anxiety. Uncertainty about the future can increase stress and worry. I want to tell you, there are times when I've been like, I don't know if this is going to happen. I'm just going to be going through this journey by myself. And that's not what I want. That's what I tell myself sometimes. And it kind of feels bad. Then I think about it, but there's this seed still there telling me there's a promise and it's going to come to pass. And the desire has not left me yet. So I know it's going to happen at some point. So, strategies for coping. The first thing we have to do is reframe your perspective and focus on the journey. So, shift your focus from the end goal to the progress you've made. That's number one. And that's what I'm starting to do, celebrating small victories along the way, considering also alternatives, explore other paths that could lead to similar outcomes. Flexibility can open up new opportunities. So when you're talking about dating, there are many ways to go about it. Maybe you're stuck in one way of thinking, and it's important that you open your mind, important that you think outside the box because there's really no formula. Ask the Lord to help you and to be strategic in how you go about fulfilling your desire if he wants you to take any kind of action. Be flexible and be open to new opportunities. Number two, I want you to practice mindfulness. Stay present. Engage in mindfulness practices such as meditation or deep breathing exercises to stay grounded. I would say meditate on scripture, right? Because some people have a big deal. They make a big deal about meditation because they don't really know. They're thinking of some kind of different, otherworldly kind of meditation. However, I was just teaching a workshop the other day to veterans on Friday, and that's one of the things that came up a lot when it comes to some of the strategies of self-care. Mindfulness just is just to help us to focus on the current moment and build our awareness to what is needed in the moment. So mindfulness is a good practice, and that goes with deep breathing and the things that cause us to relax and stay grounded when we're feeling anxious. So acknowledge your emotions. Allow yourself to feel your emotions without judgment. And this is what you can do when you're being mindful. Just be observant of yourself. What's happening around you without judgment. Don't judge yourself. Recognizing your feelings can reduce their intensity. So you might want to say when you're angry, just don't bottle it up and feel the anger, but say, I'm angry. There's power in saying, you're angry because it releases it, and it will create less tension with that anger. Also, number three, I want you to get realistic expectations. Break down your goals. This is something I have to work on as well. There's so much I can do before going before a person and saying I do again. There's so much that I want to accomplish. And those goals are right before me, and I need to write them down, right? So divide your large hopes into smaller, achievable tasks. So the fact that I want to be married again is my big goal, right? I don't have the person yet, so there has to be some step by step process towards that. If you have career goals, make those step by step objectives toward that goal. This makes the process more manageable and less overwhelming. And then you can also adjust your timelines within that. So be willing to adjust timelines to accommodate for unforeseen circumstances. Things will come up, things will cause delays, but just adjust that timeline. It's okay to be flexible with yourself and in the process. And number four, seek support. Talk to others. Sharing your expectations with friends, family, or a therapist like myself can provide comfort and new perspectives. I know for me, talking to a therapist has done wonders for me. Talking to my friends, listening. I was hanging with my girls last week at the pool, chatting it up with them. It was amazing. And that's something I had not been doing from the beginning. I just have fun with my friends, my girlfriends. And I've started to focus on other relationships outside of just a marriage partnership with someone. And so just being able to do that have done wonders for me. So you can join support groups. I just joined Divorce Care. Even though it's been a while, I've been gaining a lot from just having a group of peers that have experienced what I've experienced through divorce care. So, connecting with others who have similar experiences can offer encouragement and understanding. And number five, cultivate resilience. Learn from your setbacks. Treat setbacks as learning opportunities rather than failures. So, instead of wallowing in this idea that you failed, just consider that you're learning. This is how you will cultivate resilience and maintain that optimism. Keep a positive outlook by reminding yourself of past successes and your ability to overcome challenges. You know what? I need to do that more. I went from contemplating this podcast to actually doing it. So to me, that's a successful outcome. So the fact that I don't have millions of views or millions of followers doesn't bother me because I'm not worried about the outcome. My job is to fulfill the task that's been given to me. So we talked about trauma, right? We talked about hope deferred. And we talked about how that trauma continues or comes from many forms. And its effect can be both profound and subtle. And undealt with trauma continues to build. So often individuals, we may not realize that we're even experiencing the lingering impacts of past trauma. And these effects can manifest in various ways. I told you, through anxiety, depression, irritability, or just a general sense of feeling overwhelmed. Recognizing the signs and symptoms is the first step in addressing the hidden impacts of trauma. And it's essential to acknowledge that trauma does not define you, but understanding its presence in your life can be a crucial step toward healing and self discovery. And I've shared my personal story, my personal testimony of how I've experienced trauma walking through this. I walked through a marriage for 19 years where I was so miserable most of the time. And sometimes I'd forget the chaotic moments that would keep occurring over and over as I forgave this person. But the impact was happening and I didn't see it until it came to a point where I could no longer bear it. I couldn't bear the weight anymore. And I had to give that over to God. I had to give that person over to God. We have to find purpose through our faith. And so I found that walking through this journey that there's purpose to it. And I found it more more through my faith. For many, faith can be a guiding light in moments of darkness and uncertainty. Understanding the will of God and finding your purpose can provide comfort and direction. Prayer, meditation, and community support can be integral components of this journey. So I would suggest maybe reading the book by Rick Warren called The Purpose Driven Life. It explores the idea that understanding God's plan for you can lead to fulfilling and purposeful life. It really can lead to a fulfilling and purposeful life. And so that's a book and a classic one that most of our people, Christians, know about. The Purpose Driven Life by Rick Warren. There's also a book that a previous therapist had given or suggested to me and my ex-husband when we were in marriage counseling in the past. It says The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. It looks at how trauma affects the body and mind and paths to healing. And so if you're experiencing trauma, you may want to look into getting a trauma-informed therapist, someone who can help you walk through the hurt, the unresolved issues. It's so important. So this is also important because our heart sometimes gets sick, right? So the importance of hope. While deferred hope can be challenging, it is important to remember that hope itself is a powerful force. Okay? It fuels our dreams and keeps us striving for better outcomes. By learning how to cope effectively with deferred hope, we can build resilience and continue to move forward even when the path is uncertain. So I hope that you've learned in this segment today that coping with deferred hope involves understanding its emotional impact, employing strategies to manage it, and maintaining a hopeful outlook. This approach can help us navigate life's uncertainties and keep our eyes on the horizon where new opportunities await us. So, as we wrap up today's discussion, let's reflect on the idea that while deferred hope can indeed make the heart sick, it's not the end of the story. With time, resilience, and support, we can find fulfillment in unexpected ways. I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences. So feel free to reach out to me on social media, on any of my channels, through my website. I usually put it there in the description area for you. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. I would love your feedback, and I hope this provided some hope to you. And I just always want to remind you that through your trials, through your experiences, no matter what you're going through, no matter what trauma you face, whether you've been waiting for a long time for the promise or the thing that you've been wanting, I pray that you will stay married to His will. God bless you. And that brings us to the end of today's episode of Married to His Will. Whether you're in a season of clarity or confusion, joy or surrender, I want to remind you choosing to align with His will isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. Every step of obedience, every moment of trust is shaping you for something greater than you can imagine. Thank you for letting me be a part of your journey today. If this episode spoke to your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need the reminder they're not walking alone. Until next time, keep leaning in, keep showing up, and keep saying yes to the journey, even when it doesn't make sense. Because when you're married to His will, you're anchored in something eternal. Stay faithful, stay expectant, and I'll see you next time.